I didn't know my life was already over the night I laughed at my husband. I remember the sound of it clearly. Light, careless, almost cruel. The kind of laugh you make when you think you've won, when you believe the person standing across from you has already been defeated. 16 years of marriage ended with 2 words. I understand. That was all Austin said when I told him I was leaving him for another man. No shouting, no accusations, no tears. Just a calm nod, a steady voice, and then, "My lawyer will send the paperwork." I remember staring at him, waiting for something else to happen, waiting for him to break, to fight, to beg me not to destroy the life we'd built together. I wanted proof that I still mattered enough to cause pain. But Austin didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask who the man was. He didn't ask why. He didn't even look angry. He just let me go. That same night, I lay in bed beside Devin, my exciting, passionate, artistic escape, and laughed about it. I mocked how easily my husband had surrendered, compared him to a dog that already knew it had lost. Too weak, I said. Too predictable. Too boring to compete with a man like Devin. I truly believed I had shattered him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see yet, was that Austin had already stepped off the battlefield. And while I was busy congratulating myself, he was quietly securing every single piece of ground beneath my feet. The house I thought I'd won, never mine. The cars I drove like trophies, never mine. The business I believed I built with my own hands, not fully mine. Even my daughter, the one person I thought would always choose me, would eventually look at me with something far worse than anger. Disgust. I thought the divorce was my victory lap. In reality, it was the beginning of my slow, meticulous collapse. Because the most dangerous men aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who stay quiet, take notes, and walk away without leaving fingerprints. I mistook his silence for weakness, his restraint for surrender, his calm for defeat. And by the time I realized the truth, I had already signed my name on every document that destroyed me. Before everything fell apart, before my name became something whispered with disappointment instead of pride, I was convinced I had done life right. I was 38 years old, a licensed veterinarian, and the owner, or so I believed, of my own thriving clinic. I worked long days on my feet, hands smelling faintly of antiseptic and dog fur, coming home exhausted but satisfied. I had built something tangible, something real. People trusted me with lives they loved. Austin and I had been married for 16 years. We met in our early 20s, when life still felt like a rough draft. He was already methodical back then, an aerospace engineering student who color-coded his notes and planned semesters like military campaigns. I was the opposite, impulsive, emotional, drawn to living things instead of equations. Somehow we fit. Austin never overwhelmed me with grand gestures, but he showed up in 1,000 quiet ways. He remembered my licensing deadlines. He packed my lunch when I had early surgeries. He sat through dinner parties with my colleagues, smiling politely, even when he had to catch a 5 a.m. flight the next day. His career took off quickly. By the time we were 30, Austin was consulting on high-level aerospace contracts, defense work, projects he couldn't talk about, places he couldn't photograph. Travel became normal. Weeks away, days home, then gone again. I told myself I understood, that I was strong enough to handle it. We bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with old trees and wide sidewalks, 2 cars in the driveway, family photos framed carefully along the hall. When Mia was born, everything felt complete. She became the center of our orbit. Austin was the steady parent, bedtime schedules, homework rules, responsibility. I was the emotional one, comforting, nurturing, expressive. Together, we balanced her. At least that's what I believed. But somewhere around our 10th year, something inside me shifted. I didn't recognize it at first. It wasn't unhappiness exactly, more like restlessness, a low hum of dissatisfaction I couldn't quite name. Austin's predictability started to feel suffocating instead of safe. His quiet presence felt dull instead of grounding. I told myself stories, that he didn't see me anymore, that his calm meant he didn't care deeply, that a man who didn't fight or flare couldn't possibly be passionate. Looking back now, those were lies I fed myself to justify wanting something else. I began noticing what he didn't do instead of everything he did. He didn't surprise me, didn't flirt outrageously, didn't make me feel reckless or young. And instead of asking myself why I needed those things so badly, I blamed him for not being them. Devin arrived into that emotional gap like a spark near dry grass. At first, it was just messages, compliments, curiosity. He spoke about dreams instead of schedules, art instead of obligations. He made me feel spontaneous again, desired, alive. I didn't see it as a warning. I saw it as destiny. I ignored the fact that Austin was still paying every bill on time, still supporting my clinic, still showing up for Mia even when exhausted from travel, still choosing us every single day. Because when you decide someone is boring, you stop noticing their devotion. And once that happens, betrayal doesn't feel like betrayal anymore. It feels like freedom. Affairs don't usually begin with hotel rooms. They begin with permission. Permission you give yourself to cross small lines, to reframe guilt as curiosity, to tell yourself that nothing real has happened yet. That was how it started with Devin. At first, it was harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. A late-night message after Mia had gone to bed. A joke about how structured my life was. A comment about how I deserved more excitement. Devin always knew exactly what to say. Not in a manipulative way, I thought, but in a way that made me feel seen. Austin was away more often then. 1 week in Colorado, 2 weeks in California. A short trip overseas for an Air Force consulting contract. When he came home, he was present but tired. Quiet in that familiar, reliable way. He listened when I spoke, nodded, asked about my day, but he didn't ignite me. So I stopped telling him everything. I began protecting parts of my life from him, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because secrecy itself felt intoxicating. I guarded my phone. I angled my screen away. I deleted messages with practiced ease. I noticed changes in myself before anyone else did. I started dressing differently, not dramatically, just enough. Lipstick on days I didn't leave the clinic early, perfume for grocery runs. I told myself it was self-care, growth, reclaiming myself. Austin noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You seem different lately," he said one evening while washing dishes. Not accusing, just observant. "Different how?" I asked, my heart beating too fast. He shrugged. "Distant, busy in your head." I laughed it off. Blamed stress, work, parenthood, life. He accepted the answer without pressing. That should have scared me. Instead, I used it as proof that he didn't care enough to push. Devin grew bolder as my justifications grew stronger. He started calling during the day, sending photos of half-finished sketches from coffee shops, inviting me to quick lunches that lingered too long. I began making excuses at work. I left early. I scheduled appointments around his availability. I told my receptionist I had conferences when I didn't. Each lie made the next easier. Austin's mother noticed before Austin ever said a word. She asked once, casually, why I seemed distracted during family dinner. Whether everything was okay. I smiled and assured her it was just a busy season. Devin's name slipped into conversations more often than it should have, as a friend, a client, a creative. Austin never challenged it. And that silence, that devastating, generous silence, gave me room to escalate. By the time I realized something was deeply wrong, it was no longer about attraction. It was about resentment. I resented Austin for being steady when I wanted chaos, for being patient when I wanted pursuit, for trusting me when I wanted to feel chased. I began interpreting his kindness as indifference. And every time he came home with groceries, paid bills without discussion, asked how my day went, I felt a strange irritation rise in my chest, as if his stability was an accusation, as if the life he was quietly maintaining was something I was already halfway out of. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. This was the moment the ground began to shift beneath us. I just didn't feel it yet. The first time I slept with Devin, I didn't feel guilty. That's the part that still haunts me. I felt nervous, yes. My hands shook when I locked the hotel room door. My heart pounded like I'd just committed a crime. But guilt, the sharp, crushing kind I always imagined infidelity would bring, never arrived. Instead, there was adrenaline. Devin pulled me toward him like this was inevitable, like we'd been orbiting each other for years instead of months. The room smelled faintly of coffee and cheap cologne. My phone buzzed once on the bedside table. I didn't look. Later, lying beside him, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I told myself I could stop any time, that this was a moment, not a choice, a detour, not a decision. Austin was in Seattle that week. When he called that night, I answered with Devin's warmth still on my skin. My voice sounded normal, Too normal. "How's your day?" Austin asked. "Long," I said, which wasn't a lie. "I'll be home Friday," he said. "Mia wants to show me her science project." I felt a brief pinch in my chest. It passed. Within 6 months, I wasn't sneaking anymore. I was managing. I scheduled Devin into my life like an extracurricular activity. Only when Austin traveled. Only during work hours. Only with careful precision. I deleted texts. I memorized lies. I compartmentalized with frightening efficiency. What changed wasn't the affair. It was my attitude toward being caught. A part of me wanted Austin to find out. Not because I wanted to hurt him, at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted proof that he still cared enough to fight. I wanted shouting, demands, desperation. I wanted him to prove I mattered. Instead, when the moment came, it unfolded quietly. We were in the kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd eaten thousands of meals, helped Mia with homework, argued over nothing and everything. "I need to tell you something," I said. Austin looked up from his coffee, calm, attentive. "I'm seeing someone else." The words hung in the air like smoke. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't ask who. "How long?" he asked. 6 months. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a calculation. "I'm leaving," I added, my throat tightening. "I'm in love with him." That was when I expected something, anything. Instead, Austin exhaled softly and said, "I understand." 2 words. 16 years. "I'll have my lawyer send the paperwork," he continued. "We should keep this civil for Mia." That was it. No accusations, no bargaining, no tears. I felt suddenly unmoored, like I'd stepped off a cliff expecting a fight and landed in silence instead. That night I told Devin everything. We laughed. God help me, we laughed. I mocked Austin's calm, compared him to a dog that had already accepted defeat. Devin encouraged it, feeding my ego with affirmations about passion and courage and choosing happiness. When Austin moved out days later, leaving the house, the cars, even access to our shared account, I told myself it was because he'd been broken beyond repair. I believed I'd won. Mia adjusted faster than I expected. Devin dazzled her with spontaneity. Beach trips, late nights, sketches and movies and sugary treats. She called him her fairy tale dad. Every time she said it, I felt vindicated. The divorce moved faster than it should have. Too fast. Austin never argued, never resisted, never questioned my requests. At one point, my lawyer pulled me aside. "This is unusual," she whispered. "He's being far too generous. We should review the financials carefully." I cut her off. I didn't want scrutiny. I wanted closure. And in my arrogance, I signed everything. I thought I was walking away victorious. I had no idea I'd just signed my own sentence. The weeks after Austin left felt unreal, like living inside a carefully staged illusion. The house was still beautiful. The cars were still in the driveway. The bank account still showed numbers that reassured me everything would be fine. I moved through my days with the strange lightness of someone who believes the hardest part is already over. I told myself I was brave, that choosing Devin meant choosing myself, that the emptiness I'd felt for years was finally being filled with color and intensity. But late at night, when the house went quiet and Mia was asleep, something uncomfortable would creep in. Not regret, not yet. Unease. I replayed that moment in the kitchen over and over, Austin's face, his calm voice, those 2 words. I understand. They didn't sound like defeat anymore. They sounded like distance. I asked myself questions I didn't want answers to. Why hadn't he asked who Devin was? Why hadn't he demanded explanations? Why hadn't he fought for me? A small, treacherous part of me whispered that maybe he'd stopped loving me long before I stopped loving him. And instead of examining that possibility honestly, I used it to justify everything. Devin moved through the house like he belonged there. At first, it thrilled me. His energy filled spaces Austin had always occupied quietly. He rearranged furniture, left sketches on the counter, cooked elaborate late-night meals that made Mia laugh. But cracks appeared quickly. He complained about the routines that once excited him, about the discipline Austin had enforced, about schedules and rules and responsibilities. "He's too rigid," Devin said once when Mia went to bed late and I gently suggested we keep her on track. Kids need freedom. I snapped back that structure mattered. The look he gave me, brief, irritated, lingered longer than it should have. Mia started asking questions. "Why doesn't Dad come over anymore? Why do you and Devin argue? Why does he get angry so fast?" I brushed them aside with practice optimism. "She's adjusting," I told myself. "We all are." But Austin's absence grew louder by the day. He never called to argue about money, never questioned expenses, never asked for updates on Mia. When I texted him about schedules or school logistics, he responded promptly, politely, always focused on Mia, never on me. I told myself he was being mature. Deep down, it felt like I'd already been filed away. The first confrontation came when my lawyer called again. "Natasha, I really think we need to review the settlement more carefully." I snapped at her. "I'm happy. He agreed to everything. Why are you trying to complicate this?" She hesitated. "Because people don't just give up assets like this." I hung up. That night, Devin brought up finances for the first time. Casually, almost joking. "So," he said, swirling wine in his glass, "you really cleaned him out, huh?" I laughed. He had it coming. Devin smiled, but his eyes lingered too long. I ignored it. I told myself everything was fine. But the house felt less like a victory and more like a waiting room. And the longer Austin stayed silent, the more that silence began to press against my chest. I didn't know it yet, but this was the calm before everything accelerated, before the silence turned into consequences. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was running late, coffee cooling untouched on the counter, Mia already halfway out the door complaining about a quiz she hadn't studied for. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, stamped with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. I tossed it onto the kitchen island, telling myself I'd open it later. Later turned into 3 days. When I finally tore it open, standing barefoot in the hallway, the words didn't make sense at first. They felt wrong, like they belonged to someone else's life. "The property at this address is held within the Reeves Family Trust." I read it again, slower. "Not ours, not marital property, a trust." I laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound, and flipped through the pages, waiting for the correction. The apology, the clerical error. It never came. "As of the finalized divorce, you are no longer a resident beneficiary. You are hereby given 60 days to vacate the premises." My knees buckled. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, the paper shaking in my hands. 60 days. To leave the house I thought I'd won. The house I'd decorated. The house I'd raised my daughter in. I called my lawyer in a panic. She didn't sound surprised. "Natasha," she said gently, "I tried to warn you." She pulled out the settlement agreement, the one I'd signed with such smug confidence, and read the clause aloud. Clear, precise, unforgiving. I had signed away any claim to separate property. And the house? Separate. Worse still, when she dug deeper, the timeline emerged like a slow-motion disaster. Austin had moved the deed into the trust 13 months earlier. 13 months, right when Devin and I had started crossing lines. He hadn't reacted because he already knew. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd mistaken preparation for surrender. When I told Devin that night, expecting outrage on my behalf, he exploded, but not at Austin. "At you," he snapped. "You told me you got the house. You said you cleaned him out. I gave up my lease for this." His voice rose, sharp and frantic. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair, muttering about logistics and timing and what this meant for him. For the first time, I saw calculation in his eyes. Not concern. Assessment. Within a week, the cars disappeared. First the BMW, then the Tesla. Both leased through Reeves Aerospace Consulting LLC, Austin's company. The calls came one after another, polite, firm. I was not an officer of the business. The leases were void. 72 hours. Devin stopped joking after that. His late meetings multiplied. His patience evaporated. He snapped at Mia for small things. Crumbs on the counter, music too loud, questions at the wrong time. One night she whispered to me, "Why is he always angry now?" I had no answer. 4 months later, the last illusion collapsed. I was called into my own clinic's conference room, the same room where I'd once signed what I thought was paperwork confirming my independence. Austin owned 65%, I owned 35%. Buried deep in the operating agreement was a clause I'd never truly read. The majority owner could freeze distributions if the minority partner acted against the company's interests. My affair qualified. He had proof, time-stamped emails, hotel receipts, messages sent from my office computer, every early departure, every lie, all documented. He didn't fire me. That mercy somehow hurt more. I could still work there, still save animals, still smile at clients. But the profits were locked. My salary barely covered rent in the small apartment Devin and I scrambled to secure after losing the house. And Devin? Passion didn't pay bills. One night, drunk and bitter, he finally said it. "You were supposed to be my ticket out." The words landed like glass. By the time he apologized the next morning, something irreversible had already broken. And in the wreckage of everything I'd chosen, I realized the escalation wasn't over. It was only gaining momentum. Rock bottom doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers. The first was Devin leaving. I came home after a 12-hour shift at the clinic, feet aching, scrubs stained, head buzzing from exhaustion, and the apartment was silent in a way that felt wrong. His shoes were gone, his jacket missing from the hook by the door. On the kitchen counter sat a yellow sticky note. "This isn't what I signed up for. Good luck." 8 words. That was all 2 years of passion, promises, and destiny amounted to. I stood there for a long time, reading it over and over, waiting for anger to arrive. It didn't. Just emptiness. The second layer was what he left behind. A box, forgotten in the closet. Inside, printed emails. Intimate, familiar, devastating. Another woman, a surgeon. The dates started weeks earlier. The lines were identical. "She doesn't understand me. This is temporary. Once my project is funded." Only this time I was her. I laughed. A sharp, hysterical sound that turned into sobbing before I could stop it. I slid down to the floor, clutching papers that proved I'd sacrificed everything for a man who replaced me without hesitation. The third layer was Mia. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She looked at me with something worse. Disgust. She'd found the old messages, how mayonnaise. Not the recent ones, but the buried ones, synced to my iPad from years ago. From the time her father was overseas working a contract for the Air Force, while I sent undressed photos to another man. "Dad was working to pay for my school," she said quietly. "While you were..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She packed a bag and left to stay with her friend Brooke's family. 2 weeks passed. She didn't answer my texts, didn't pick up the phone. The apartment felt like a mausoleum. The final layer came at the grocery store. I saw Austin near the meat counter, selecting steaks and a bottle of wine he'd never touched during our marriage. He looked lighter, younger, stronger. When he noticed me, he gave a polite nod. "How's Mia?" he asked. "She's staying with a friend." He frowned. "That's strange. She told me she was with you." The realization crushed my chest. She'd been protecting me. Even now. I watched him walk away, and something inside me finally collapsed. 4 months later, I could say it clearly. I hadn't lost everything. I'd thrown it away. Austin hadn't destroyed me. He'd simply stepped aside and let gravity do its work. I lay awake most nights staring at the ceiling, replaying choices, conversations, justifications. I thought about the woman I'd been, confident, accomplished, admired, and the woman I'd become, a cautionary tale. And somewhere in that darkness, the most painful truth settled in. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the lesson. The moment that finally broke the illusion didn't come with shouting or tears. It came with clarity. Mia returned one afternoon, not to move back, but to collect her clothes and books. She moved through the apartment quietly, efficiently, folding, sorting, packing like someone much older than 14. I watched from the doorway, my throat tight. She lived with Austin now, a sleek condo near her school, doorman, gym, stability. She barely looked at me as she packed. "Mom," she said finally, her voice calm but distant. "Dad knew about Devin the whole time." The words landed softly, and still they shattered me. "He hired a private investigator," she continued. "He had photos, recordings, everything." My legs gave out, and I sat on the edge of the bed. "He could have destroyed you in court," she said, "but he didn't." "Why?" I whispered. "Why didn't he fight?" She paused, folding a sweater carefully. "Because dragging you through the mud would have ruined you, and you're still my mom." That was when I understood. Austin hadn't been weak. He'd been merciful. Later, I learned what he'd been building all along. While I was dismantling our life, he was constructing a stronger one. His consulting firm had secured a $40 million Department of Defense contract. He trained jiu-jitsu at dawn, attended investment conferences on weekends. Preparation, not revenge. The next time I saw him was at Mia's school science fair. She won first place for a project on aerospace propulsion, the kind of thing Austin lived and breathed. I stood in the back of the auditorium, clapping softly, watching them celebrate. Austin looked impeccable, tailored suit, confident posture, and beside him stood a woman I recognized from the news, a legislative director for the Senate Armed Services Committee. Young, composed, intelligent. They looked like a family, the family I'd thrown away. As they left, Austin approached me. "Mia misses you," he said. "Give her time." "Did you know?" I asked quietly, "when I asked for the divorce." He didn't answer immediately. "I knew about Devin 3 weeks after that first coffee," he said finally. "The hotels, the lunches, the money." My knees went weak. "Why didn't you stop me?" "What would that have changed?" he asked. "You'd already decided I wasn't enough." He shook his head. "I let you be who you are." As he walked away toward a sleek electric Porsche, something inside me finally settled. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about accountability. And for the first time, I stopped blaming everyone else. 6 months after that science fair, Devin was no longer the center of my regret. He was barely a footnote. I worked long hours now, not as an owner, not as a partner, but as an employee in someone else's veterinary practice. Dr. Patel was kind, fair, professional. He paid me well enough to survive. But survival is not the same as dignity. Every time I signed paperwork that wasn't mine, followed protocols I didn't design, or watched younger associates negotiate equity while I stood silent, I felt the weight of what I'd lost. Austin eventually bought out my 35% stake in the old clinic. Fair market value. Enough to clear the credit card debt I'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle with Devin that neither of us could afford. Not enough to start over. Mia and I spoke once a week. At first, they were stiff conversations, weather, homework, logistics. Slowly, cautiously, something softer emerged. She came for dinner occasionally. We didn't discuss the affair. Some wounds don't need reopening to remain painful. Austin's life, meanwhile, continued expanding. His firm's reputation soared. Industry articles mentioned his name with respect. His calm authority, the one I'd once dismissed as dull, now read as power. His girlfriend became his fiancée. She was pregnant. A boy. Mia showed me ultrasound photos on her phone, her voice bright with excitement about becoming a big sister. They were converting Austin's home office into a nursery. The life I could have had played out in real time through my daughter's stories. I saw Austin once more, briefly when Mia needed braces. My insurance didn't cover the full cost. I swallowed my pride and called him. He didn't hesitate. "Send me the orthodontist's information," he said. "I'll handle it." "No lecture?" I asked quietly. "I'm helping my daughter," he replied. "Any benefit to you is incidental." That stung more than anger ever could. I began therapy twice a week. Not to feel better, but to understand how I'd become someone capable of such delusion. My therapist called what Austin had done a tactical withdrawal, a military term. You retreat not because you're weak, but because you're choosing better ground. Except Austin never returned to battle. That was the genius of it. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to punish me. He let life do the work. The truth is, my reputation didn't collapse overnight. It eroded. Friends drifted away. Invitations stopped coming. Family conversations grew awkward. I became the woman people spoke about cautiously. The woman with the cautionary story. Austin lost nothing he valued. I lost everything I took for granted. And in that imbalance, I finally understood the fallout wasn't about assets or money. It was about character. 1 year later, this is my last update. Not because I'm healed. Healing isn't linear, but because I finally understand what this story is. I'm sitting alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, takeout containers spread across the counter, writing to strangers because I burned every bridge in my real life. And for the first time, I'm not pretending this is someone else's fault. I wasn't unhappy. I was ungrateful. I confused stability for stagnation, quiet strength for weakness, a man's lack of drama for lack of passion. Austin loved me in 1,000 invisible ways, the kind that don't trend on social media or make good stories over wine. He protected our family, built a future, and trusted me completely. I repaid that trust by mistaking excitement for connection. Devin wasn't evil. He was exactly who he always showed himself to be, a dreamer without a plan. I just chose not to see it because his chaos made me feel young. You can't build happiness on betrayal. Any joy built on someone else's destruction is borrowed, and the debt always comes due. Mia and I are rebuilding slowly, carefully. She comes for dinner once a week now. We talk about school, college plans, her dreams of studying aerospace engineering like her dad. The pride in her voice still hurts. But I let it. Some pain is earned. Austin is getting married next summer. His fiancée is pregnant. Mia is ecstatic about her baby brother. The life I once had unfolds without me, and that's the consequence I carry. My therapist asked me what I've learned. Here's the truth. A quiet man is not a weak man. Someone who doesn't fight you isn't someone who can't fight, and tactical withdrawal is not defeat. Sometimes the most powerful move is stepping back and letting someone reveal exactly who they are. I thought I'd broken Austin when he didn't fight the divorce. The truth is, he'd already won before I even knew we were playing. If anyone out there is reading this, standing at the edge of a choice, mistaking boredom for betrayal, don't be me. Because sometimes the person you think you've defeated was never fighting you at all. They were just clearing the battlefield for their real victory.